evergreen.
Yeah.
So that
Yeah.
20 years from now.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah. Alrighty. So, ladies and gentlemen, that music's playing real nice in the background, dude. I dig that tune. We are here today with Southeastern Louisiana University English Department's Colloquium. Today's guest is, I guess you could say, very close to what the Colloquium is as a form. He is a writer, I'll say in the broadest term, because there's novels, which he's most known for, but there's poetry, there's essays, there's reviews, blogs, a lot of stuff in the catalog that makes his identity. He is also the undergraduate coordinator here at Southeastern Louisiana University. If you've read his work, he's very enigmatic. I think as a person, he has a little bit of an enigma around him as well, just because of his temper. But without further ado, I'm very proud to and honored to invite for the inaugural interview this semester, Mr. David Armand. How you doing, David?
Good, man. Thanks for having me.
I'm glad you're here, man.
Yeah, me too. This is great.
It's good to be physical with somebody,
Yeah,
right?
isn't it?
Yeah. So just to let y'all know, the way that this interview will be compared to the other ones and the previous one that Kendall and I did with Linda Wolverton, since he is a faculty member here, I don't plan to dig into everything about David because he's here for you to talk to himself. But I do want to scratch some surfaces. So I'll start with this. He's known as a Southern writer. And if you would like to know what he thinks about the South, I would say read his books, right?
Yeah.
But I'll ask him this question first. What do you think it means when people call you a Southern writer? What do you think they're trying to say?
Yeah, that's interesting because I think different people will ask that same question but expect different responses, or that they have this notion of like the answer before you even give them the answer, you know. Right. So like Southern writers, you know, people think Faulkner, people think Flannery O'Connor, people think the grotesque, and people think grit lit. That's a new term that's sort of come out. And honestly, I don't really care for any of those labels, and not because I think I'm like beyond them, but I think they create these ideas that, you know, it's like, oh, if you're a Southern writer, you only write this type of stuff. You know, you're obsessed with religion. You're obsessed with, you know, this sort of hard scrabble kind of existence, you know. I know a lot of my work deals with that, but I like to think that it goes a little bit further than that.
Yeah.
And of course, you know, I mean, I was born here, I was raised here, and so I think I just can't help but write about it. But I would also hope that, you know, like my books and the stories that I tell could take place somewhere else and still kind of touch on the same stuff.
Right.
So.
Yeah, no, that's the reason I asked that question is because there seems to be a tradition that is expected.
Yeah.
Does anybody say, oh, he's a Southwestern writer or a Midwest writer, and they expect a tradition to be carried so pronouncedly? Maybe so. I don't mean to insult those traditions.
No, but you're right. And I think if there is, it's not nearly as common as it is if somebody's called a Southern writer.
Right.
You know, because you're right. I mean, you don't hear like necessarily like a Midwest writer.
No tradition follows that.
Yeah.
Right. But I guess that will bring me to my next question nicely. So here it is. And you know this quote, but maybe our audience doesn't. So I'll do a little explication. So Flannery O'Connor said, "The presence alone of Faulkner in our midst makes a great difference in what the writer can and cannot permit himself to do. Nobody wants his mule and wagon stalled on the same track the Dixie Limited is roaring down." So just to explain what most people interpret that to mean, it's you don't want to be doing what Faulkner did, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
My question to you is, do you ever feel like you are consciously working your identity in relationship to other artists?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I think, and Faulkner being one of the big ones, you know, I mean, I think when I started writing my first novel when I was in a Faulkner seminar class, you know, so I think that I just couldn't help but kind of just, you know, be kind of like walking beneath his shadow, you know. But then it's also, you know, like Harold Bloom calls that the anxiety of influence, you know. So I mean, there's that anxiety of like, well, you know, is my work derivative? You know, does it sound too much like this?
Right.
And so sometimes, you know, those comparisons, like people have made them before to my, you know, like my work, and I'm just like, wow, that's like a really big compliment. But then at the same time, it's like, well, I don't know if I want
right.
that necessarily, you know, because I think like any artist, like you would, I mean, you want to do your own thing,
Right.
you know, and we speak to those other people, or with them, but
Right.
You want to make it new, you know.
Yeah, and there's, like we were saying, with the construct of the Southern writer, there's a mold that people expect.
Yeah.
So I've seen they say you're like O'Connor and Faulkner and McCarthy, which are all outstanding writers, which are great company to be. But at the same time, we would question, is that really what it is, or is that what they just want you to be or expect you to be? So it's good to hear that you're aware of that, because I know and you said the anxiety of it.
Yeah,
so.
And I mean, at first I thought, man, this is the best compliment anyone could give.
Right.
And then over the years, it's turned more into like, well, no, I don't want to do that. You know, I don't want to be that. Even though I tremendously admire that work and that style and the things that they did. But yeah, I mean, that, like Ezra Pound said, make it new. You know, you have to make it new, do something different. Yeah. But it weighs on you, though, definitely.
Certainly. So to get into the personal of it all, and so I am a big Armand fan. All right. So I try to keep up to date with what he is, and I found this blog last week that you just posted in for the first time in like 3 or 4 years, right? I don't mean to put him on the spot, but so just to explain the blog, just in general, and I'm gonna let him further explain what's going on. He apparently has a photo album of time before him and maybe when he was a child, and he's writing in. If he's not in the picture, there's like sometimes limited, sometimes a 4-away third, and if he's in the picture, he puts himself in. But it definitely has a fictionalization to it. Yeah. Why did you do that exercise? Number one. Number two, why did you put it online? It's very intimate.
Yeah. Well, so, you know, so like I wrote a memoir, you know, a few years ago, and I never ever thought that I would do that. I never planned on doing that. It just sort of happened. You know, my life just took sort of a unique twist, and you know, I wrote about it. And then a couple of years ago, it took another really strange twist in that I found out just by accident. I took a DNA test on Ancestry, and this person popped up on there as being my first cousin. And I had never heard this guy's name in my life. And I had like more DNA shared with him than anybody else on there. So I went down this rabbit hole, like trying to find out, well, first, okay, this is a mistake. Like, who is this guy? He lives like in Ohio. I've never been to Ohio. So long story, kind of short, is that I found out he was actually my uncle. And when I found out who his brother was and looked him up on, you know, the beauty of the internet, found this guy, his Facebook page, and he looked exactly like me. Damn. Like, I mean, it's because somebody even said, it's like, man, did you ever think like your life is just kind of like a book, like waiting to be like, you know, so, and I guess I felt sort of like, I have to write this, you know, I have to write this story. But so basically, you know, the man who I thought was my father, you know, kind of like the Pearl Jam song, you know, the Alive, you know, I mean, he grew up thinking this other dude was his dad, and he found out that's like a traumatic, like earth-shaking thing, you know. And so for me, I was lucky because I reached out to this guy, and he had no idea I existed. Right. He didn't even remember my mother, you know. He obviously, you know, they just had like a little fling, and here I am. But he was willing to meet me. At first he wanted to take a paternity test, you know, and he was willing to do that. We did it, and it came back. It said 99.99%. Oh, wow. You know, I mean, so there's no doubt. And not to mention he looks exactly like me. And so I wrote this little piece, you know, because I love, in poetry, I love ekphrastic writing, you know, where you look at an image and you write about it. And so I had all these pictures, and I was thinking about my childhood and thinking about how different my life could have been had I known this man like my whole life, and that when I was 38 when I first met him, and started looking at photographs of him that I had gotten, that I had acquired since I met him, and then it ended up with me imagining, because it occurred to me, it's like, wow, you know, I know that there are people in the world who don't have pictures of them with their whole family, like they don't
Right.
exist, like their parents. But I thought about that. It's like, wow, there will never be a photo of me with my mother and my father, because my mother passed away, and so that will never happen.
Yeah.
And so I imagined what that photo would look like, and so it's kind of like an ekphrastic essay, I guess. It's
Yeah.
like an experimental kind of thing, and trying to tell that story, but just in a different way.
So the photo album is not real?
The photo album's real. All those
Okay.
photos exist except for the very last one.
Oh, really?
Because the very last
I
one,
see.
it says, "This is me when I was 10 years old."
Yeah.
When I was 10 years old, I didn't even know. I knew who my mother was, but I wasn't raised by her, and then I had no idea
Yeah.
who this other man was, and
Wow.
he didn't know. And it's been weird because he and I talk. We still have a relationship and everything, and I think he feels very remorseful, even though I don't think he has a reason to. He didn't know that I existed.
Right.
And my mother didn't know. That was the weirdest thing. She thought that some other guy was my dad.
Yeah.
So,
Wow.
yeah.
Yeah. We chuckle a little bit. That's that Eudora Welty peculiar funny, not the ha-ha funny,
yeah.
like Luth quote. It's how, like you said, like your life is a book,
Yeah.
ready to be written, how those things line up like that.
Yeah, and I believe, like wholeheartedly that these things aren't accidents, I guess you could say I was an accident, like in the sense that, my mother didn't plan to get pregnant with me from a guy who, I don't know what the circumstance was, how they met or whatever, but I feel like I was given this opportunity to write and share a story.
Yeah.
And then it's like, now I've been given a story, to share. So it's like, I feel like it's like my duty to write it,
Yeah.
tell it. Because
Yeah.
I know there are a lot of other people who have similar stories, and that I know for me, if I had read that story when I was younger, or at any point, that's how we are as human beings. We connect to other people through those things, those similar stories.
Wow. Yeah. That's beautiful, dude.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I knew that you, just from taking your course and just reading a few of your novels and poems, I knew that you worked from images.
Yeah.
And a lot of stuff. So I wanted to play a little game with you.
All right.
And we calling it the reverse Rorschach test. Okay. So I'm gonna present you with one of your novels, and if you could tell me the image or the experience or the smell or the sound or whatever that inspired that specifically. If you can remember, you can pass.
Okay.
So we'll start with the pugilist's wife.
Okay.
All right.
And I'm pretty sure I'll be able to remember every one, because because people ask, where do you get your ideas?
Right.
That's one thing that, and I've been asked that a whole bunch of times, and I always tell people, sometimes they seem disappointed to hear this, is like, well, I don't really ever get ideas. I have an image.
Yeah.
And so everything that I write starts just with a picture that's in my brain.
Right.
And so for the pugilist's wife, it started as kind of like a something I had heard. Like, a friend of mine lived out in Sun, where that novel takes place, which is going toward Bogalusa. It's like in the country, pine trees, woods everywhere. And he was supposed to spend the night at my house, or we were in high school, and he was going to ride the bus home with me. And that day he came to school. He said, "Yeah, hey, I can't come to your house, because this guy escaped from the jail in Bogalusa, and he's out at large, and my mom lives by herself, and she's afraid that he might wander up to our house, because they lived out in the middle of the woods." So he had to go home, and that was when I was in high school. It was like some years back, and that image always stuck with me of the image of this woman standing on her front porch, looking out into this vast pine forest, and wondering if this guy's going to emerge, and if so, what is he going to do? And that anxiety of being alone and not knowing. And so that's where that novel came from, is just that image.
Yeah.
And so the invention part came in where, because in real life they caught the guy, they had all their helicopters and dogs, and they caught him. Nothing happened. But in the novel, the guy emerges from the woods, and she takes him in, and then the novel sort of unfolds from there dramatically. Things happen, and but that's the image, basically, just someone standing out, looking out into this abyss, I guess, and wondering.
All right, then how about the Lord's Acre?
The Lord's Acre, I think That started actually, that one's weird because that started with an image that didn't end up in the book. So I was like, I knew I wanted to write about a cult.
Yeah.
Because I've always been fascinated by cult leaders, and even when I was younger, I remember when I was like 13 or 14 reading a book about Charles Manson, which is kind of weird, but I was just interested in like people like that. And so the image that the Lord's Acre comes from is I was imagining these young boys walking through the woods, and they see their pastor whipping one of the congregants with a stick, who had like done this minor infraction, and they're standing there watching, and their whole image of this guy has been shattered, and they don't know if they should tell someone. They don't know if the person may be really, because they have all their faith is in this guy, and they think, well, maybe this person deserves this. And of course, by that point, I had read Jim Jones. I mean, he would spank his congregants in front of the whole congregation if they had done this minor little infraction, and then we all know what happened, in Jonestown. So I was real interested in that, and that's how the novel originally opened. And that novel was a lot longer than it ended up being, and that was one of the scenes that came out, but that was the image of two kids witnessing something like that.
So you had that image, or that's the image you came up with? You saw it? Or you
I just came up with it.
That's not even in the book.
Yeah, I know. That's what
you were saying.
Interesting. Yeah.
Wow, man.
Yeah. And that was the opening scene. Originally, that was like the scene. The book opens with these two boys walking through the woods. They hear something, and they look over, and they see their beloved pastor whipping somebody with a stick.
Man.
But then it changed, and I still wanted to have the drama in the opening, so it opens a lot differently, but it's still a dramatic, I think, I hope, beginning, and something compelling.
Yeah, it's different.
Yeah,
it's a different story in a way. But how about the gorge? So
that one, same thing. Image. One other thing that I just have this morbid fascination, I guess, with things. There was when I was younger, I saw the movie Dead Man Walking.
Okay.
And I was kind of interested that took place not far from where I grew up.
What is this movie, Dead Man Walking?
So Dead Man Walking is about this guy from Franklinton, and I actually went to school with like some of his cousins.
Oh, wow.
In Folsom. He and a friend committed this horrible, horrible crime in Franklinton, which isn't far from Folsom. Just a terrible crime. And so they were sentenced to death row and were ultimately executed. But there was a movie made about it with Sean Penn and Susan Sarandon, who plays a nun. It was a real person. And she was actually my mother's teacher in Catholic school, and my mother, Sister Helen Paige, and she's real vocal even now about the death penalty, speaking against it. She counseled this guy while he was on death row.
Oh, wow.
And sort of came to the conclusion that the death penalty is not right. It's not good. And even though this guy did this, he should be forgiven and not, freed from prison or anything. But so long story again, short, trying to shorten it, is I had this image of that crime.
Yeah.
And being the people who came across the aftermath and then trying to figure out who did it and why. And, in a small town, people gossip, people talk, people make speculations about things that aren't true. And so it all started with the image of them finding this murdered couple.
Yeah.
So same thing, just an image.
And that's why, and this last one, because this is my favorite Armand book, Harlow.
Yeah.
Was there an image for that one as well?
Absolutely. Yeah. And I'm glad that I'm able to readily remember all, because it's like, one of those books, that was like 10 years ago when they came out. It's like, but I hear interviews with writers all the time, and or Stephen King is one. Somebody will ask him about a book, that came out 30-something years ago, and he still remembers the character's first and last name and what they did. And it's like, I mean, this guy's written like 60 books. I guess you just never forget that stuff. But so Harlow, I was driving with my family out in the country. Like, we used to do this a lot more when my kids were real little. That's the only way to get them to fall asleep is get in the car, put them in their car seat, and drive, and then they'd fall asleep.
Yeah.
And so we were driving out. I I guess going up toward Kentwood, up 51, that back way.
Right.
And I looked over, and there were these big, deep ditches on the side of the road. And my wife's always like, like if I start to kind of edge over toward the shoulder, she'll kind of slap me in the arm a little bit, and make me, get back on the road, because I get distracted. But I was imagining, like, what if there was like a kid just sleeping in the ditch right there?
Yeah.
And I thought, and so that's the other thing. So with those images, there's always a question. So it's like, okay, there's a kid sleeping in this. Why the heck would he be there? Why would he be doing that? And then that's how I write novels, is I start answering all the questions that arise from the image. And so that's when that one came from. I thought, well, maybe it's a boy who's on a journey. He's walking from one place to the other, and he sleeps in this ditch for some reason, and maybe it seems a little implausible that someone would do that. But I also know that people in desperate situations, I mean, when I was trying to find out my father and kind of confirm who he was a couple of years ago, I did things that were completely uncharacteristic of me. I was very bold, because I'm kind of an unassuming person, and I called him up and said, "Did you ever meet this woman named Susan in the 1970s?" And he said no. And then as we talked, after a while, things started to kind of come together and make sense. So I guess my point is to say that things seem implausible, but when you're in a circumstance, you'll do things that might surprise you, and that's what that boy does.
Yeah, certainly. And I don't want to push it too hard. Like I said, it's first time a reverse Rorschach test may have been done on anybody, especially their novels. But I will say it's just a compliment, which I'm not supposed to give too many on this thing, especially more inquisitive. I am from Tangipahoa Parish. You go to Washington Parish for the fair.
Yeah.
You go here and there. You really do write the area.
Yeah.
Which it's poor. It's a poor area.
Yeah.
Especially you're from Washington Parish. Well, it's Folsom, St. Tammany, or
St. Tammany.
St. Tammany, but you're on that line up there.
Not far.
Not far, but it's a unique culture because we're New Orleans inspired, but we're not New Orleans.
Oh, yeah.
We're Mississippi influenced, but it's not Mississippi either. It's just strange middle of it, nowhere and everywhere.
Yeah.
Yeah,
that's a good way of saying it.
It really is. So I know that specifically Harlow, I mean, the Lord's Acre did it for me as well, and I think all the books do it, but Harlow, knowing how to, I don't know how to walk from Sun to Amite.
Yeah.
I don't know, but I could imagine someone doing it. So you ask, could the guy be asleep in the ditch? I mean, if he's walking from Sun to Amite.
Yeah.
That's that kind of welty thing, right?
Yeah.
If you can get the reader to believe a little bit of something that's unbelievable just for a second, you can...
And that's the thing. I mean, I think at people in situations, I mean, I may have done that, tried to make that track, because when you want to know the truth, at least the way I am, like I'll do whatever I can to find it out. And this, I apologized in a way to my father, the one my real father, because I was like uncharacteristically aggressive in getting that to happen. And I don't honestly regret it at all, because I mean, I think I had to do that. I had to know that truth. And I think Leslie, the boy in Harlow, is the same thing. He has to know.
Yeah.
And weirdly enough, that book was my initial experience trying to find the guy who I thought was my biological father my whole life.
Yeah.
I didn't walk across the country like that, but I was told that it was this one guy, and he lived in Slidell. I looked him up in the phone book. I wrote him a letter. That's when people used to write letters. And he called me up. I met him, hugged him, met his family. He met my kids. I thought this guy was my dad for years. And then all of a sudden, I found out he wasn't. So, I mean, there was a little bit of like humiliation and all that involved.
Yeah.
But I look at all that stuff now and just think, man, this is just something that I can use to, provide hope maybe for people. I mean, instead of, because I could just kind of like curl up and just say, man, this is all so bad. I'm not going to even try anymore.
Yeah,
but
Kudos again.
Yeah,
Like
I mean,
someone I had, and I know we'll have a question. In fact, I'll throw it to Kendall, this next one, because the graduate students are extremely interested in the memoir.
yeah.
They need to read it.
Yeah,
But they really want to know the process. So Kendall, we have a question I know that was submitted about a memoir, right?
Yes, we have a question from Lindsay. She was asking that pertaining to your personally inspired novels and especially your memoir, what have been the effects of allowing readers to have such an intimate gaze into your life and the lives of others? Has it ever felt intrusive?
That's a good question. To me, no, it hasn't been. I mean, I think if I were worried about that, I wouldn't have published it. Although at the same time, and I mean, I am kind of an open book, I think, and I don't mind telling people. I wrote that memoir in 6 weeks.
Oh, wow.
Which was the quickest I'd ever composed anything of that length. And then I sent it off to a couple of publishers, and within 4 weeks, I had a contract for it, and then it came out in less than a year after the contract, which is something that just never, ever happens. So I didn't really have time to think about, like, wow, how is this going to be received? What are people going to, because I write about things that are embarrassing and things that are hard to read. But I also remember reading memoirs that did similar things and just feeling so connected to the person who wrote it, and so like in awe of their vulnerability, honesty, that I felt like I owed it to myself to do that. And so really now, I mean, I feel like no question is really off limits for me anymore. I just, maybe I overshare, I don't know, but I feel like, it's kind of like our job. I'm protective of my family, my kids. I don't write a lot about my kids and that kind of thing. I mean, a little bit, but as far as my own life, I want it to be an open book, because I think people can be inspired by that. I was, and still am,
And you're young.
Yeah,
Right,
I still think I'm young.
Yeah.
I still feel young.
You definitely vibe young, man.
Yeah.
So, well, to bring up Kendall on that last question, I know that last episode, which was we had Linda Wolverton, and Kendall asked this question, and I guess it's tricky to ask you now, knowing you to start with an image, but after you have an image, what element of the story do you start with? Is it setting? Is it a character? Is it a theme? Or is it something else, or a combination?
I think all of my novels have been the same in that, so I have the image, and the image creates questions. And then from those questions, I would say character is what just kind of naturally develops from that, because the character is in the image, and then I'm asking, well, what is the character going to do now? And then setting is a close second, because to me, the setting is also a character, because where we live, where we grow up, influences how we respond to things, I think, and if I had grown up in not to pick on the Southwest, you mentioned the Southwest earlier, but if I grew up in like New Mexico or Arizona or something, I wouldn't be writing the books that I'm writing now. I wouldn't respond to my environment in the same way, and so it's the image, then character, and then setting, very close second. And theme, never. and the reason why is because I think that and I've talked to or read interviews with novelists who have tried to write a book based on a theme, and it usually is just kind of, it's not successful, I'll say it that way, because theme can get in the way, and it can make you do things that you shouldn't be doing. You should tell the story. Themes emerge later, and then you can go back, and that's a great thing, is you can go back and finesse them and say, wow, I see this image going throughout the novel. Maybe I should kind of develop it a little bit more in places.
Yeah.
So theme is always like at the bottom of the list for sure.
And that definitely is a Southern thing.
Yeah.
That theme would be the bottom of the list.
Yeah.
I'll say that's not surprising as a reader of yours, because there's a lot of questions that are raised that aren't so easily answered.
Yeah.
I don't think you're trying to answer questions.
No.
You're trying to present them. That's who is that? some Russian writer. So the
Yeah.
writer, all writers steal from each other anyway.
Oh, yeah,
So I'll just
yeah.
say, Dr. Lou said.
Yeah.
We're all just stealing from each other,
Oh, yeah.
right?
Yeah.
But I'll steal from him to say that you're not giving the answer. You're just giving the question forwardly and clearly.
Yeah.
Right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And I've read novels that attempt to give answers. Another class I'm teaching this semester, we're talking about White Oleander, which is a great novel. And we just finished our discussion of it today. And I was glad that all the discussion leaned toward the fact that students appreciated that there was no answer at the end. Like, we don't know how this is going to all turn out. We just get a glimpse, and it's up to us to say, okay, this is a good ending or this is a satisfactory. But I mean, I think the artist's job is just to ask the question, articulate the question, bring it forth, and then the reader's job is to come up with the answers.
Yeah. Well, that's, like I said, read his books, and not to keep plugging it, but hey, if you haven't read it, you're kind of catching in. So let me ask you this next question, which you're kind of alluding to. The writing and writer relationship. Is it strange in the fact that, so I'll just ask the question. I don't know how to explicate it, and if you need me to set it up for you better. Is the David Armand, what is the difference between the David Armand who wrote The Pugilist's Wife and the David Armand who's speaking to me right now as a writer?
That's a good question. So when I wrote that novel, that I was still in graduate school, so I was a little bit younger, and it came out 10 years ago, and I cannot read my old books, reread them. I just can't. And I think some of the things I was concerned with when I was writing that novel, I've gotten them out of my system, and I think, and I'm less concerned with experimentation like I was with that book, like jumping around in time and omitting punctuation marks, and I thought that was real important when I wrote that. And in Harlow too, I did the same thing. Like you said, we steal from others. I mean, Cormac McCarthy does that, and I love Cormac McCarthy, and I thought, well, if he can do it, I'm going to do it. And not just because of that, but he did an interview and he said, well, why clutter up the page with all these little useless marks? Like, people know when it's dialogue. If you write well enough, you don't need to put a comma there. You don't need to. And so I took that to heart and thought, okay, well, I want to, and I was trained as a poet too, so I relied on line breaks. I relied on concision, and that book's really short. It's the shortest book I wrote, and I was more interested in just the imagery in trying to use that to make propel a story.
Right.
And same thing with Harlow. But by the time The Lord's Acre came around, I thought, I don't want to use any more tricks. It's like, I think it was Rocky 2, so like Rocky, I always use movies, but he was a southpaw, and so when he had to fight Apollo the second time, Mick made him tie his arm, it's like, you have to learn how to fight right-handed now, but then when Rocky wins, after, if y'all haven't seen it, sorry, but he wins in Rocky 2, and he's like, I don't want to use any tricks, no tricks, and so I started to look at that as like a trick, it's like, well, this guy's known for this style, he's not putting punctuation and all. So it's like, no more tricks. I'm just going to write it like a normal and see what happens.
Yeah.
But I hope, people who are artists, I mean, you always want to do something you didn't do before.
Right.
And
I mean, I guess to extend on this question, because it's been a year and a half since Lord Acre's been published, or 2? Or even shorter?
Not quite a year.
Not even quite a year.
July.
July. Coronavirus made it.
Well, yeah, I know.
Like
yeah.
Are you a different writer already from the Lord's Acre, do you feel?
Yeah. I'm already, believe it or not, knee deep in a new novel, and it's totally different. It's a horror novel.
Really?
Yeah. And so it's, I think a lot of literary writers try their hand at genre. Colson Whitehead wrote a zombie novel. And Cormac McCarthy, I guess, you could say The Road is like a science fiction novel. And so I wanted to write a horror novel, and I thought, how can I do that but still make it literary? But it's not. So I've never ever seen a ghost. I've never ever seen anything like that. But everybody in my family claims that they've seen this stuff.
Yeah.
And so I'm still writing what I know. I tell people, write what you know, right? And so my whole life I grew up hearing my mother, my grandparents, like talking about these weird supernatural things that they experienced. And so this novel is trying to kind of, recall all those stories I heard and the skepticism I had because I never saw it. But maybe that's the writer in me, but I still believed them, like even though I never ever, and to this day, never have seen anything like that in my life, but I still believe it when somebody says that they do. And so I'm trying to do it and not and follow the advice I give to people because I read a lot of horror from students love to write genre fiction, and I always say what you don't show the reader is the scariest,
right?
And so I'm trying to keep a lot of it off the camera, and to me that's the most frightening thing.
Do you mind sharing with us just a little sneak peek? Can you tell me, and it might change, but right now, what point of view are you writing that in?
This one's written in third person.
Okay, so is it more limited or
third person limited?
Okay.
To a boy, his name's Matthew, and it's basically me. And so it's like Harlow. It's like the Lord's Acre. It's like all these. And I guess that's why I'm able to like kind of produce these so quickly. It's because I'm just like remembering all these things and then writing down all these memories, but just attributing them. And so it's third person, but it's also all written in the present tense. But
build that tension, right?
Yeah, and the other thing that this one is different too is because I was thinking about this. It's weird. Like every book that I've written takes place in the 1980s, but you wouldn't know that because I never mention any popular culture ever. The Lord's Acre mentions Ronald Reagan, because of the Just Say No campaign. That was big when I was a kid. But beyond that, there's none. And so I watched Stranger Things when that came out, and I loved it. And the reason I loved it is because of the 80s nostalgia. Like I was the target age group for that show. I was born in 1980, and so I grew up watching all those same movies, all that stuff. And so I thought, man, this is like the time to like, write this nostalgic piece. And so like there's like tons of pop culture in it. So it's like totally different from anything I've done. And it feels like a risk, but I want to.
Yeah. Well, was it an essay or the poem about Nintendo?
Yeah.
I read.
There was I wrote a piece about, playing Nintendo as a kid.
Yeah.
But I think pop culture, like, is because of course, the part of me that just takes this so seriously, like I've researched, like, well, what is it? It seems like every 30 years, people become nostalgic for the time 30 years ago. And it's like, now we're about 40 years from the 80s, but everywhere I look, it's like 80s nostalgia.
Certainly.
And before that, in the 80s, I remember it was like 50s nostalgia. Everybody's nostalgic. And so I was reading articles about that, and that's like a very common thing with about every 30 years, people start looking back.
Yeah.
And I thought, man, this is like the time I need to write this book.
Definitely.
So
listen to the music right now. It's so 80s influence.
Yeah, I know.
It's so 80s. Not as good as the 80s, but definitely.
Yeah, and I still listen. My kids make fun of me, and I still listen to all that 80s stuff. Not just like the pop 80s, but like Guns N' Roses and all that.
Yeah.
But it's fun because I can put all that in a book now.
Right.
And I feel like I have permission.
Well, I'm excited, dude. Especially, I know The Lord's Acre. I've read most of the catalog. Is that the first person you wrote in?
Yeah, that was
Yeah. So to hear now you're going, that was the right question to ask is how you've changed, because this next novel being a horror.
Yeah.
That's brand new territory for you.
And it's hard to do because I've read horror and I've liked certain horror novels, but some of them are just awfully cheesy, And I don't make a secret of being a fan of Stephen King. I like a lot of Stephen King stuff.
Yeah.
But like The Shining, which I think is a good book, just has some of the cheesiest stuff happening in it, like these big shrubs that like come to life, and they're like these dinosaurs that shake. That doesn't happen in the movie, the Kubrick movie, which I love. I think is a great film, but I don't want to put anything like that in there. So it's all like more like Hitchcock, where it's kind of off the screen, like you don't, Like, you never see Norman Bates, in the shower scene. You never see, I don't want to spoil that if anybody hasn't seen that movie either. But, like that to me is the brilliance of horror. It's like when you don't actually see it. Because our imaginations are way more frightening.
Well, you remember, you've brought it up in class before, the Signs movie.
Oh, yeah.
The reason why it's so scary and it's underwhelming at the end for most viewers when the alien is revealed. But
that ruined that movie for me.
It did as a kid. I remember being scared.
Yeah.
And then I was like, wait.
That part just makes you laugh, and not in a good way.
No.
Because it was just like, man, if that part had not been in there, I mean, that movie was good.
Yes. Yes. And I'm glad you bring up, I quoted 100 times. I quoted it. Kendall heard it. Caleb heard it 100 times with Wolverton. Because we've had this philosophical question: write what you know, you write what you know, you write what you want to know.
Yeah.
That, like, walking those lines and being any one of those you want to be. But I know you do that wonderfully. I know not everybody has. Like, how we were talking about Robert Olin Butler's.
Yeah.
He's a Vietnam War vet, and all of his stories are from Vietnamese Americans' perspectives.
Yeah.
So it's what he knows, but it's almost what he wants to know too. But I say that because that's Southern writer tradition right there.
Yeah.
It's in it.
Yeah.
But Kendall has another question for us. Go ahead, Kendall.
Yeah, so actually this relates, since you just said you are working on something new. Alex wants to know, how do you balance your writing process in terms of time management?
Discipline, like extreme discipline. I think it's not easy, because my classes, I'm lucky. My classes don't meet until the afternoon. I come here every day, but I get here at 8 in the morning. Even though I'm tired, I get here and I just sit in my office and I write until I hit 1,000 words every day. And then I get ready for class, go to class, go home. And I mean, I would love to be able to spend 4 hours a day doing it, but usually my pace this past semester has been 1,000 words a day, and I can usually get them in about an hour. Today, it took me 2.5 hours to hit 1,000 words. But the point is that I did not stop. Even though my hour was up, I thought, I'm going to hit 1,000. And when you do that, I have almost 40,000 words of a novel that I started last semester. Which, I mean, it seems kind of ridiculous. But, I mean, again, I mentioned Stephen King. He said, well, if you write 1,500 words a day, in 3 months' time, you have a pretty nice sized novel. And then the work is to go back and revise what you, because I don't work from an outline, and I don't work chronologically. I write a scene. And every day I have a scene in mind that I'm going to write. And I don't even worry about, is this going to make it in the final draft? Like the opening of The Lord's Acre. I mean, that didn't make it. Mm-hmm. But psychologically, when you open a document and it has I think I have 135 pages now. When I open that, it just is so much easier to keep going because it feels like I have so much already. There's no point in giving this up. But it's not always like that, because I mean, sometimes the semester it's like I get here at 8 o'clock and I have these urgent things I have to do, and so there will just be no time for the writing. But in the beginning of the semester, I'm fortunate because it's not all hitting me, and I just. Some people say writing's fun. I wouldn't say it's fun, but I love doing it because I feel like it just gives my life like meaning. Like I'm working on something, and I don't know, it's meaningful.
So that means that you're on a regiment. So
Yeah.
like, if you don't just work by inspiration. If you're not feeling inspired today, you still write, right?
Yeah, and sometimes it feels like pure work. And Faulkner said that. He said, because somebody said, "Do you write every day or only when you're inspired?" And he said, "I write only when I'm inspired, but I'm inspired every day."
Oh wow!
But he didn't say what he was inspired by. It could have been just to pay the electricity bill.
Yeah.
Because I mean, Faulkner painted billboards. He worked in a post office. He worked in a boiler room. He was poor, and so the only thing, and he didn't have a high school diploma. I mean, he didn't have many prospects, and so I think his inspiration a lot of the time was just to put food. He had a lot of people that were looking up to him to support them, you know.
Yeah.
But I'll also say this, because I mean, this is just life. I mean, so like I don't write when I'm not here. So like tomorrow all the way until next Thursday when we're back on campus, probably won't write a word, and I'm okay about that. Like I don't ever beat myself up if I don't do it.
That's refreshing though.
Yeah.
It does reinvigorate what you're doing.
Yeah, because
right?
I mean, sometimes it's good to spend a couple of days away from something, and then I always just like to say that too, because I think I always heard writers say, I write every day from 5 a.m. till noon. I take an hour break, and then I get back on the keyboard until 5 p.m., 7 days a week. And I thought either they're lying or they just don't have to do anything else but that. And I know that's not true for people. Flannery O'Connor, I think, was, because she lived on a peacock farm and she didn't have teaching obligations. And Faulkner just refused to really do anything but write.
Yeah.
Even though it cost a lot, you know. But I think it's important to tell people, don't worry about it if you don't write every day.
Yeah, and I know you're a big proponent of, because I agree, in other art forms, you're writing or you're in the process of writing even when you're not behind the keyboard.
Yeah, and that's another good thought, I think, to share with a lot of people, is that, I mean, like if you're a writer, you're writing all the time anyway. Like when you're sitting at a bar having a beer, you're listening to what people are saying, or you're just looking and noticing the way things look, the way things smell, sounds. And if you train your brain to do that, like you just are always doing it, you know. But you have to be careful, because I mean, like for me, I mean, I can get into that little space, and everything else is kind of shut out, you know. And I don't want to do that to people.
Yeah,
you know?
Yeah. It's a Liberace says if he didn't practice for 1 day, he would notice. If he didn't practice for 2 days, those closest around him would notice. If he didn't practice for 3 days, the people would notice. Yeah. Even though nobody would have noticed after 3 days, what he's saying is, you know, being disconnected from the art of what he does, there's a little bit of loosey-goosey. But when you're a creator, that's a little bit of the technician side, what he's talking about, I think. When you're a creator like you, like you're saying, you're observing. Yeah. And you're image-driven. I would probably say all writers, or even if they don't know it, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And you're always listening. I mean, that's the biggest thing, is just listening. Not necessarily the mind for stories, but just hearing the way people talk, the cadences of you know, people in your area, and the way buildings look, and the way like the paint is fading on the bricks of this building. Like, you know, some people drive past that and they just don't, you know, but artists notice those things, and they should be paying attention.
Yeah. And Kendall has another question, you said?
Yeah, we have another question from Christian, and Christian wants to know, is there a particular work that was more taxing to create than the others?
I think, well, the Gorge was tough because that had very little of my own life in it, you know, and I'm a big proponent, as Tyler knows, you know, write what you know. And I didn't know much about that kind of thing, you know, other than watching Dead Man Walking, or you know, knowing about police work. But I didn't really want the book to be about that. But it was hard because I wrote it, and it was about 75,000 words or so, and the publisher wanted me to cut it down to 50,000, and so I cut out a lot of stuff. But you know, the part that I did know that kind of drove the book for me is one of the characters, Grady, which the novel almost was called Grady, but it became called The Gorge. But Grady's one of the main characters, who has a strange relationship with his mother, and that was based off of my imagining what it had been like had my mother raised me, because she was very sort of overprotective, and it's disturbing. It's a disturbing book, you know, but it was the hardest one, I think, for me to write, just because I didn't know a lot about those kind of things, about the crimes and how they're solved, and how, you know, that kind of stuff goes down. But
interesting. Did you ever have to take a break from it?
No, that's
No.
yeah. I'm very like, so when I start on a project, I just go till I get to the end of it, and then I might put it away for a little bit and start on another thing. But I usually don't work on things simultaneously, unless I'm writing like, sometimes I'll write poems, or like a short essay or something like that. But even when I'm doing that, I'm thinking like the bigger picture, like this is going to be a part of this thing, But yeah, I think that was the Gorge was probably the most difficult.
Cool. And the horror novel, that's not been as difficult as the Gorge, no?
It's not at all, because it's all like the same thing. It's like I'm just writing about all these things that happen.
Gotcha.
And it's so weird because it's like, the whole time growing up, I never saw anything like that. And my first memory, like, so we moved from New Orleans when I was about 5 years old or younger, because I hadn't even started school yet, to Covington. We rented this little house, and we were poor, and so we had this little bitty house, 1 bathroom, and 5 people in the family. And one night, my brother, we slept in the same bed, because we had our same room, a little double bed. We were sleeping in the same, and he woke me up and he said, "David, look in the closet, look in the closet. Somebody's looking at us." And I looked in there, and I didn't see anything. And I said, "What are you talking about? Just go back to bed or whatever." And he said, "No, look, there's eyes in there that they're looking at." And he really saw this. I mean, until this day, he said that he saw these 2 eyes looking out. And I never believed. I never saw it, but I believed that he really did.
Yeah.
And then fast forward a few weeks later, one night my dad like woke up in the middle of the night, and he said that somebody was choking him, but we couldn't see anybody. And my dad was not the kind of guy to believe in that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And this is my stepdad, not my biological dad, but he also suffered from alcoholism, and he had some issues, which I wrote about, my memoir. But I kind of am trying to play with that idea too. It's like, well, does like those sort of things make somebody more prone to? But I'll say this: after that happened, he said, "Oh, that never happened. What are y'all talking about?" Like he just denied that.
Oh,
But
wow.
I mean, I have a distinct memory of him waking up and him saying, "Get him off me, get him off." And he said there was a man choking him in his bed. I mean, and all this weird stuff like that happened in that house, and we moved out not long after.
Oh man, I'm excited for this.
Yeah, so I'm like writing all this stuff. It just feels weird because it's like, I don't know. I mean, I've never written anything.
But
like
I'll say that
before.
all your novels, they have that fogginess ready for that.
Yeah.
There's a mystery. I call you enigmatic. Even though we've talked a lot, I still feel like there's so much about, and I've read about you. There's so much I feel like I don't know, which is fine. That's how people are. But your novels, even your poetry, has that little bit of. It's just like it's not foggy as in the way that you can't see the things. The things are mimetic for certain, but there's just it's a different shade going on.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's just who you are.
It is. Yeah. I mean, that's my like people have criticized me, I think, for being aloof, and like hard to know,
Yeah.
And I don't do that on purpose. I mean, I think that's just like kind of like I've felt kind of guarded, in certain times, and which is weird because when I write, I'm not like that at all.
No,
But I see people like who I admire, like artists and stuff, and they're all like that. And I'm not trying to like cultivate like somebody else's image, but like in like people who like they can't make eye contact and they don't really say much, but then they get up, on the stage or whatever to perform, and all of a sudden it's just like this like totally different person comes out.
Yeah.
And I think
the persona.
Yeah.
The artistic persona.
Yeah.
That's I read Armand's stuff. I'll play. But what are some of your favorite books? I know this is a question you're asked, so I have that question for you, and I have a fun question after that one. So, what are your standard interview question? What are your favorite books?
That can change depending on what day you ask. I mean, I do. I mean, I always, the people in one of my classes that I taught, they said, yeah, one day we're going to have a drinking game in your class. Like every time you mention Stephen King, we're going to take a shot. And I don't know why I mention him so much, but I think it's because I started reading his stuff when I was young, and then I was sort of taught to think he's no good. When I started coming to college, it's like, you don't read that garbage. You need to read this. And then the rebellious part of me, when I started teaching, said, well, I'm going to teach a Stephen King novel. I'm going to use one in my class because there is value in it. So that's a long way of saying that one of my favorite novels is 11/22/63.
Okay.
Which is about a guy who travels back in time to stop the Kennedy assassination, which sounds wild. But when you read the way he writes it, it's about way more than that. It's like one of the few books, like there are a couple of books that I read and I cry when I read them. That's one of them. The other one is The Road by Cormac McCarthy. But he just makes it seem like, wow, yeah, somebody really could just travel back in time and do this. Because the way it happens in the book, he's like in a diner and he walks into the broom closet, and when he comes out, he's in the year 1957. But the way it just happens, it's just like, well, yeah, I guess if there's like this like little ripple in the space-time continuum, however you want to say that, like that's where it would be, like in this little broom closet in this diner in Maine,
Yeah.
And I just thought that was such a cool way to handle that. It's not like the DeLorean or something, or Back to the Future, where I don't know. So I love that book, and it's long. It's like 900 pages long. I've read it 3 times.
Oh wow.
So there's that one. I love Cold Mountain by Charles Frazier. Steinbeck, East of Eden. I love long books, but I don't write long books.
No.
And like the one I'm writing right now, it's about close to 40,000 words, and I feel like when I hit 60,000, it'll be done. Because all my other books were about 50, 60.
Yeah.
The Lord's Acre, I think, was 75. And I don't know why that is, but I love to read long books. I just don't write them.
And it may, not to analyze you, but it may be the poet in you.
Yeah.
That can be more concise and nuanced.
Yeah. Yeah, because Stephen King, like to mention him again, sometimes he probably has stuff in there that doesn't need to be there. And like his books are 900 pages long. It's like, and I'll read it because I just like his writing, but they don't need to be that long.
Right.
And it's hard to get books published that are that long unless you're Stephen King.
Yeah, and maybe there's a little bit of a price hike if you.
Well, that too.
You're picking it up. You might be making profit on it.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely.
But hey, he's Stephen King.
I know. So somebody would publish his grocery list. I'm sure, like one day, they'll have like a book, just a collection of all his tweets.
Yeah.
After he's gone, they'll probably be like, and people will buy it.
Certainly, they find if anything Faulkner coughed on, they find it and sell it. So.
And that's something too. When I was learning to write, the most valuable thing, other than my teachers, the great teachers I had, was reading biographies of writers. Particular Faulkner, I probably read 3 different ones of him, and then letters. So somebody like Faulkner, there's like a book of all his correspondence, or at least the ones that still exist. That was just so like enlightening for me to read that. Like, wow, this is how like an artist progresses and how an artist thinks on a daily basis. And then the greatest one is John Steinbeck. There's a book called Journey of a Novel, and what it was when he was writing The Grapes of Wrath, and then he did For East of Eden, every day before he started working on the novel, he'd write a letter to his editor, just talking. Even if he wasn't going to give it to the editor, it was, today I'm building a coffee table, my wife wants this for our anniversary, and I'm working on this, and then we're going to go to a baseball game, and he just talk about like mundane everyday stuff. And then he would say, and then when I sit down on the novel, I'm going to start like fleshing out this scene. When you read that and you actually like, you're getting like this glimpse into this guy's mind, like this is how this thing was made. Yeah. I tell students all the time, you have to read it. Or like the Paris Review, they did the Art of Fiction interviews, and it's just such incredible information on there about craft and all that. So
yeah, and I would highly suggest all the students, the workshops here at Southeastern, that's what they're for, that craft, that discussion of craft. I know in your workshop, it's you talk about meaning and things like that, but it's a craft workshop.
Yeah.
So for those who are, when he's talking about that, if you want that experience, there's people in there who are just taking that class They don't take anything else. It's the only workshop really around here like that. So, but here's the fun question. You can defer if you'd like, but we thought this was interesting. What is your least favorite book that people have said should be one of your favorite?
Well, so I know the answer comes to my head like immediately, and I know that I will catch a lot of heck for this, but I'll just say it. A Confederacy of Dunces. And so if Richard Luth ever hears this, I mean, my theory behind that book is that the legend behind how it became published is what, and it's not a badly written book. I think it's just not as great as people say it is. And I mean, that's just my opinion. I mean,
right.
And again, I know people would vehemently disagree with that. But again, you know, I mean, honestly, I mean, to me, the story behind the book is more interesting than the book itself.
Right.
And how much of that is apocryphal, I don't know. But I actually, when I was in high school, this guy whose family owned Lichtenstein's grocery store in New Orleans, big outlet, I don't think it's there anymore. But he grew up with John Kennedy Toole. They were friends as little kids. And John Kennedy Toole was like this child prodigy. Like he could play Mozart when he was like 6 years old, and his mother just doted on him. And then he went on to college, and I think he taught in Lafayette and then at Loyola maybe at some point, and he could never get this book published. And as we know, you know, he ended his life. And then after that, his mother championed his book and took it to Walker Percy, who was at Loyola, and said, you have to read this. And Walker Percy said, you know, I can't tell you how many times people come to my office and give me their masterpiece, you know, and say it's the best thing ever. And he said, but I started reading this, and it really was special. And so it was published, and then it won a Pulitzer, I think. And then, now it's just part of, like, I mean, it's taught here, and people love it. And I think I'm in the very small minority of people who just don't like it. And I almost want to say, and I'm sorry, but I'm not going to apologize. That's the book. That's the book.
Good. Well,
but I'm not saying people shouldn't read it, because I mean, they, you know.
Yeah. No, it is subjective.
Yeah.
I'm sure there's a bad review of an Armand book out there.
Oh yeah, there is. There is.
On Google or Amazon or whatever.
It's on Amazon.
I
could probably recite it to you.
Really? Tell me, what book is it for?
It's for my mother's house.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it's the one star review. And you know, I know, you know, we're not supposed to look at that, but you can't help it. You know, you want to see what people think of your stuff. And this person wrote, and what I felt was unfair about it, you know, because of course you don't want to be like, I can take criticism,
right?
Okay? But this criticism wasn't of the book, it wasn't of the writing, it was because the person didn't agree with my choice in life to, you know, because my mother, you know, she was schizophrenic, and I didn't know her. I met her when I was 20 years old. She had given me up when I was probably about 2 years old. And I went through a lot of stuff, you know, which I wrote about. And then after I met her for the first time, we lost touch. And then she tried to kill herself. And somehow I was the one who found her, you know, and saved her. Like, I mean, if I drove out to where she lived, and I found her, and the cops came, they beat her door down, they grabbed her, and they, you know, somehow they were able to save her. And she had to live with me for a few months because she had nowhere to go.
Yeah.
She was in a hospital for a while, and then group home. And I have to say that was one of the most amazing experiences in my life, you know, because it was hard. But like, I had this bond with her that it doesn't matter. Like, all that crap that happened, like that mother-son bond is something that you need. I think people need. I don't know. I needed it. And but anyway, this person is, so the end, you know, in the end, I had to have my mother leave. I mean, she couldn't keep, I had 2 young kids, I had a wife, and she was very demanding of my time, and it was affecting me emotionally. It was hard. And so I had to, you know, make the choice to send her back to her house. And so the person who wrote this negative review was criticizing me for my life decision, not the book. And I thought, that's not really that fair, you know. And I'm not one to, I would never do this, is get on Amazon and like, you know, because I've seen authors do that. And I just thought, man, that's just like the epitome of like, it's just best to just not say anything.
No,
you know, it's
you're
like,
right.
that's her opinion and I respect it. But
It's not about the work.
yeah, but my argument would be, and I kind of suspect I even know who wrote it because I was at a symposium and I was reading from that book, and I said, yeah, this memoir that I really like called This Boy's Life, which was made to Leonardo DiCaprio. It was kind of an older movie, but it's really good. The book has an epigraph, and it says, "This book is dedicated to my stepfather, who told me when I was younger that everything I didn't know could fill up a book," which is like a crappy thing to say. And he said, "Well, here it is."
Dang.
That's how he dedicated the book. And so I kind of prefaced my reading just by saying, you know, like, not like as a jab to my mother or anything, because I didn't put that. I just said, I hope my mother will still love me if she reads this. That's how I dedicated the book to her. And I don't know if she ever did ever read it. I don't know. But the person who wrote the review said something along the lines like, it sounds like this guy is just trying to say, look at all the horrible stuff I've been through, and now here it is, or something. But the way it was almost like she was somebody who was in that audience or something. I don't know. It was weird.
Yeah.
So I didn't want to spend a whole lot of time trying to figure all that out.
No.
And waste
Well,
time.
thank you for sharing it. But
Yeah.
I think, someone who read the memoir, and you and I have spoken of, there's an aloofness, there's emotional restraint,
Yeah.
which is unsettling, but it's what provides such emotional weight of the story, and that might have been part of what they were feeling. Is especially if they may, for one to be so personally offended, they probably have an experience similar to that.
And she did. She mentioned
Okay.
that in her review too.
Oh,
She
wow.
said, my mother is schizophrenic and she passed away, and I'd give anything to spend one more day
Yeah.
with her.
It's some
And
kind
so,
of
I mean, I
projection.
really get
Yeah.
that. And that's, again, why I wasn't angered by it. I just thought, I felt it was unfair because it wasn't really a review of the book, but just my choice versus what she would have done.
Right. No,
And my mother passed away, and I would give anything to spend another day with her too,
Right.
you know, and so, you know, I don't know. I mean, I think that everybody has their opinion, you know, and the right to it.
I think that if anything, that shows that book has some emotional weight to it.
Well, yeah, if they respond negatively in that way, I think, I mean, at least it affected them. At least they weren't just like,
Yeah.
But as you know, you mentioned that. I mean, I've read memoirs where you could tell the person who wrote it had an axe to grind, and I never liked that, you know,
Yeah.
because, and I can't remember the name of the book, but there was a memoir that this guy wrote where he became best friends with this guy who turned out to be a con man. You know, the guy said he was related to the Rockefellers, and the tone of the book was just so angry. And I immediately could see, it's like the reason this guy wrote this book is just to, like, you know, get back at the guy who tricked him.
Yeah.
You know, and I don't think people want to read those stories. I think, I mean, I don't. I mean, and I think you just want to kind of have that distance as a writer, and then let readers make their own judgments, you know.
Yeah. Well, she didn't like your memoir. You don't like Confederacy of Dunces. That's part of the art, right?
Yeah.
But anyway, that wraps up. That's where we're at. We're at the hour mark. As we develop this, like I said, we'd love to have Armand back. We have other setups that we're planning to do that I will beg him to be a part of. Before we go, this is his last novel he had, The Lord's Acre. Mine's all written and studied. I'm going to get mine signed before this. If you want to go and follow us on Instagram, the _Iconocast, I'm buying another copy, and I will pick from the people who follow the Iconocast over the next week. We'll get a free copy of his latest album, The Lord's Acre. He's working on a horror novel now. He's an instructor here at Southeastern. And just want to say thank you, man, for I know you're an open book, but every time you begin to talk, I feel like going to church a little bit, you know? So I appreciate it, man.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. It was an honor.
Yeah, dude. Well, this is Southeastern Louisiana University English Department Colloquium. Kendall, co-producer, Caleb, technician. I am Tyler. We are thankful that you spend a little time with us. And again, check out the Iconocast. Next guest is February the 22nd, Nicole Samek. She is a Francophone literary scholar and translated much of, I shouldn't say much, only one of Maurice Condé, because Maurice Condé only lets her husband translate anything else. So Samek's position is very unique. But we'll be there on the 22nd, and share this podcast. This will be archived for those who couldn't stream live, and we'll see y'all next time. Enjoy your day. Dude.